Cornelia Neuert is a social scientist and head of the team Questionnaire Design and Evaluation at GESIS, Leibniz Institute for the Social Sciences. Her research focuses on methods for testing and evaluating survey questionnaires and questionnaire design. Thank you so much for joining us, Cornelia.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I would try to share my slides. So then, perfect. Okay. So thank you very much for having me. Today, I would like to talk about cognitive interviewing, conducting it in a traditional way, offline or online. And yeah, if you have any questions and something is not clear, please just ask the questions or interrupt me and ask, and other questions we can handle in the end. But if you do not understand anything, then just let me know. So I want to start with the question, why test questions at all? And the quote of Sutman and Bradburn well answers this. So no expert can write a perfect questionnaire simply sitting in their office. And respondents' experiences and attitudes are too multitudinous in nature. So even after years of experience, no expert can write a perfect questionnaire. And if you do not have the resources to pilot test your questionnaire, don't do the study. So only with the help of empirical pretests, it is possible to check whether survey questions actually measure what they are supposed to measure and whether they are reliable and valid. So what is a cognitive pretest? Very briefly. So almost all people can usually come up with some survey questions or can draft survey questions. This is only the first step. So you then must really carefully assess how good the questions are and revise them as necessary. So the term survey pretesting broadly refers to the evaluation of individual questions or to the whole questionnaire before their use in the field. So the ultimate goal of a pretest is to optimize a questionnaire prior to its use in the field and to ensure that it gathers high quality data. So pretests are an essential part of the questionnaire design process. And survey researchers have various pretesting methods to choose from, like expert reviews or behavior coding. And in this talk, I would like to focus on the method of cognitive interviewing and possibilities to conduct them. So, as I said, in their traditional way, offline in a lab, but also in an online mode using the method of web probing. And yeah, web probing would be the main part of this talk. So we will talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this method compared to in-person cognitive interviewing, and also how to implement cognitive pretests and yeah, when to implement them to get get a sufficient data collection with them. So let's start with cognitive interviewing. Here also a quote, a definition by Beatty and Willis. And I think that quote sums the practice of cognitive interviewing up quite nicely. So cognitive interviewing entails administering draft survey question while collecting additional verbal information about the survey responses, which is used to evaluate the quality of the response or to help determine whether the question is generating the information that its author intends. So that means that respondents don't just answer the questionnaire itself, but they answer questions about the questionnaire, like in a conversation. Cognitive interviewing aims to get insights into what is known as the cognitive process of survey response with 4 stages. the first stage, comprehension. So how do respondents interpret questions, and then how do they retrieve relevant information and events from memory? How do they arrive at a judgment about what to answer? And how do they map their internal answer to the answer categories provided? So, and problems may occur in any of these stages. So a respondent might or may misunderstood a word or the whole question, or they may also understand the question, but may not be able to retrieve the information. And what I might find a suitable response category that reflects the internal answer. So there might be several problems that might come up during the question answering process. And to give you an example how cognitive interviewing works, to observe such problems, here's an example we tested in our cognitive lab at GESIS, and we tested respondents' understanding of a question on civil disobedience. And sorry, it's not civil disobedience. It's the term citizen of the world. I'm sorry. So, and this was taken from the International Social Survey Program, the ISSP. And the question to be tested was, I feel more like a citizen of the world than of any other country. And respondents answered the question with a 5-point scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. And we found that only 2 out of 20 subjects said that they do not know what the term citizen of the world refers to, or that they are unsure about the meaning. So the other 18 participants selected an answer from the response scale without hesitation. When then actively probing respondents and asking them to tell us how they understand the term, it turned out that further 5 respondents interpreted the phrase wrongly in the sense of human being. So example quotes were, for me, citizen of the world refers to all human beings living on Earth. Or another subject said, everyone who lives on Earth is a citizen of the world. And all 5 respondents strongly agreed with the statement, or rather agreed with the statement. So the proportion of people feeling like citizens of the world would probably be overestimated with this item. And how can this be explained? So usually respondents are not asked to or expected to express problems when they face them when answering a questionnaire. And for this reason, it is really essential to actively pretest questionnaires and ask respondents questions about the survey questions. Otherwise, such problems would not be transparent to you as a researcher. So let us discuss the steps of cognitive interviewing in more detail. Conventional cognitive interviewing takes place mainly in a cognitive lab, meaning not under regular field conditions, and respondents are briefed about the setting as being a pretest, and that it is their task to help find problems and improve the questionnaire. And I must say that there's not one standard way of carrying out cognitive interviews, but the following 3 steps usually guide the interview procedure. So it depends on the lab or the researcher how the interviews are conducted, but the 3 steps usually all interviews have in common. So first, participants answer the question to be tested, just like they would do if this was the final questionnaire. And while they are doing this, the cognitive interviewer observes any unusual reactions that might occur. So if someone looks confused or, for instance, angry. And respondents can also be encouraged to verbalize their thoughts while answering. You might know that the technique of think aloud, and yeah, respondents can be asked to think aloud while answering. And when the question has been answered, the interviewer then asks specific follow-up questions to understand how respondents decided on their answer, or probe for specific terms, like in the example before. And these follow-up questions are called probes. And the main goal of both think aloud and probing is to get specific information about respondents' understanding of terms, the whole question, or answer categories, or more generally, how respondents answered or arrived at their answers for the question. Here on this slide, I've just listed several variants of probing with example wordings. I will not go into further detail here, just to give you an idea what can be asked during interviews. And the probes are mainly oriented on the question response process, so the 4 phases of the response process. And we will come back to the probe types later during talking about the web probing. So just to give you an idea. The current practices of cognitive interviewing ranges from completely unstructured to completely standardized interviewing. And there are no clear rules or even evidence of how many interviews should be conducted per pretest. So usually they are conducted with a small number of interviews and in a one-on-one setting. And usually participants should somehow resemble the respondents of the actual survey with regard to characteristics of greatest interest. And it's also good to have a variety of demographics, such as age or education, or any other important study-specific variables. So this really depends on your target population. And the length of the interview is also not fixed, but as a rule of thumb, should not exceed 90 minutes, because otherwise it gets too burdensome for the interviewer, but mostly for the respondent. So and this is also the reason why participants usually are paid for their time and effort during participation. So this was a brief summary of the method of cognitive interviewing, and an alternative and a rather new method to conduct cognitive interviews is implementing the probes into an online questionnaire. And the method used is called web probing. And in particular, in times of COVID, this proved to be a great alternative, although it's of course possible to conduct face-to-face interviews in a remote setting, but web probing really proved very useful during the last 2 years. So what is web probing? Web probing is, as I said, defined as the implementation of probing techniques from cognitive interviewing in web surveys. That means we ask open-ended or closed questions as follow-ups to closed survey questions within the context of web surveys. And thereby we use the same probing techniques like in cognitive interviewing. And the probes can be formulated as an open-ended probe, or you can also use closed probes. And mainly you will use open-ended probes, and when you ask open-ended probes, the aim is to use the answers of these open-ended probes to evaluate whether the survey questions measure what they are supposed to measure. So the goal of web probing is the same like in cognitive interviewing studies. You want to know whether your questionnaire is valid and reliable. Let us also look at a concrete example here. On this slide, you see the target question, so the question to be tested. And this is a multi-item question with the question text, the individual items, and the provided answer options. And respondents select an answer in each row and then click continue to move on to the next question, like in a usual web survey. And the target question is, for each of the following statements, please select the response which best describes your work situation. And then the individual items follow. So, for example, your colleagues help and support you. And next item is you are consulted before objectives are set for your work, and you decide which answer you would select. In web probing, the target question is then followed by probes, like I said, the follow-up questions. And here, the same types of follow-up questioning can be used as in cognitive interviewing. And here, for example, a general probing, and an example for a general probe would be, what were you thinking of when answering this question? And a second probe variant are specific probes. So specific probes focus on a particular detail of a term or on specific aspects that got activated in the context of a given question. So here we would repeat the question. The previous question asked whether you are consulted before objectives are set for your own work. What sort of work objectives were you thinking of in this question? And to additional probe variants, in category selection probes, respondents are asked for their reasons for having chosen a specific response category. And the answers usually take the form of a short argumentation. So reasons why the option was selected. And the final probe variant are comprehension probes. And comprehension probes ask respondents to define how they understand a certain term or what ideas they associate with a certain term in general, or what the question is aiming at in a more abstract manner. And here an example would be, who are you thinking of when you read colleagues in this question?
Cornelia, we've got a question in the
of course.
Grant.
That's pretty generic, Cornelia. You might want to save that till the end.
Okay. Then, so you can ask
I'll
it
ask.
now,
I'll ask it at the end. Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Yeah. Then I will continue. So, in comparison to face-to-face cognitive interviewing, web probing has several benefits. So not just that you don't have to interact personally, but for one, it is easier to recruit large sample sizes. So this also implies that it's easier to get access to geographically and demographically diverse respondents. And this is also faster to realize when recruiting respondents via the internet. So if you use, for example, an online access panel provider, then it's relatively fast and easy to get the sample sizes you would need for a pretesting study. And another benefit is that the self-administered survey mode guarantees a kind of standardization of probing and also rules out any interviewer effects. So if you have a very experienced interviewer, the interview will go a bit different than if you have a fresh interviewer, or each interviewer brings up some specific interviewing style, and with the web mode, then you have a higher standardization across the interviews. And another benefit of the web mode is that there's no need for transcriptions of interview sessions in verbal data. So usually when conducting face-to-face interviews, you record them, and afterwards you have to transcribe them, and this takes 2 or 3 times longer than the individual interview. And with web probing, the answers to open-ended probes are typed by respondents and can be exported in Excel files afterwards. And another, or the final benefit here, is that findings from web probing can be quantified. So you can have larger sample sizes, so you can have a sufficient sample size to have at least a good idea of response distributions and themes that come up during probing, and this might help to prevent false positive findings. So findings that you would not find in the field, or just a couple of subjects will bring up, but which are not really relevant with larger sample sizes. Of course, the method has also some disadvantages compared to face-to-face cognitive interviewing. And the first corresponds to the pretest mode. So not only benefits, you as a researcher are really restricted in the probing questions you can ask. So as the probes have to be implemented into the web survey in advance, and as there is no interviewer present, there's no interviewer who can follow up on incomplete answers or ask additional probing questions when more information would be necessary to understand the respondents, or to interpret the answer. So usually in a face-to-face cognitive interview, when it turns out that you do not understood whether, or you're not sure whether the respondents really understood the question or whether there were any problems, then you would ask further follow-up questions. And in the web mode, you're less flexible to react, and it's not possible to or it's hardly possible to amend the probes during field time. So of course you can do a pretest of the pretest study to see whether questions or probes work, but there will still be respondents who misunderstand the probe, or give too short answers, and you do not know whether or how to interpret them. And for that reason, the wording of the probe really requires specific attention. So it's important to be very precise in the formulation of the probe. And as a general rule, you should also avoid to address more than one topic within a probe. And if you are interested in different topics or arguments, then ask 2 questions or 2 probes instead. With regard to response quality, the absence of an interviewer may lead to a lack of motivation among respondents, and this can result in an increase in probe non-response. So respondents do not answer your open-ended questions, and also in a high amount of not interpretable responses. And answering open-ended questions also increases the burden of respondents. They have to type in their answer themselves. And this automatically leads to more probe non-response than closed questions and closed probes. And finally, while it is beneficial to have a higher number of respondents, a high number of responses to open-ended questions also means higher effort in data analysis. So yeah, you should find a good way to have a large sample, but not too large. Otherwise, you end up in a month of coding open-ended questions. Yeah, what of course is important, or an important research question is whether web probing and cognitive interviewing produce similar results and also lead to the same suggestions for item revisions afterwards when both are used as a pretesting methods. And in 2 studies that were conducted here at GESIS, we could show that there's an extensive overlap between the results. And yeah, both studies found that they detect very similar problems and also led to the same suggestions for item revision. And here's an example from the study I conducted together with my colleague Timo Lenzner. And in this study, we compared the findings of respondents drawn from a non-probability online panel with the results obtained via face-to-face cognitive interviewing. And in the face-to-face interviews, we conducted 20 interviews in our cognitive lab, while the sample size of the online pretest was about 500 respondents. And here is the question where we tested civil disobedience. And for comparison of modes, the question was, how important is it that citizens may engage in acts of civil disobedience when they strictly oppose government actions? And we asked 2 types of probing questions: a comprehension probe, what does the term civil disobedience mean to you? And a general probe, where we asked, can you explain your answer a little further? And respondents should elaborate on their response. And as you can see in the table, the face-to-face cognitive interviews and the web probing identified the same question problems, namely that the term civil disobedience was unfamiliar or undefined. It was often associated with violent behavior, and the response scale was interpreted as reaching from non-violent to violent behavior instead of the intended importance of the of civil disobedience. And with regard to the prevalence of the problems, you see that you see in the table that there were some substantial differences between the 2 methods. So, for example, the first problem, that the term civil disobedience was not familiar, occurred in 30% of the face-to-face cognitive interviews. And in the web probing, only 5% respondents said that the term was not familiar to them. And this might be due to the fact that participants in the face-to-face setting often spontaneously comment on an item before they are asked to answer the probe questions, while in the web probing, respondents answer the target question and then move on and may not expect that they are asked to explain their answer further. So this might be one reason why respondents in the web probing focused less on not knowing the term or not exactly being able to exactly describe what the term civil disobedience means to them. Nevertheless, the same problems were found in both modes, pretesting modes. So an important aspect to consider when using open-ended probes is that, like usual open-ended questions, as the demand of respondents is higher, it's really important, how to formulate the probes, and because respondents have to formulate their own answer and write it in a text box, and they cannot use the response options, and are not sure what the question is intending. So research on open-ended question shows usually that the proportion of people who do not give an answer is much higher than with closed questions. So one challenge is how to design and implement probes in a way that maximizes response quality and reduces probe non-response. And one important factor is the text box size. So not only the content, but also the expected scope of the answers should be clear to the respondent. So I would recommend to indicate with the size of the text box what level of detail is expected from the respondent. So if you would like respondents to provide a short essay, as it, for example, desired in a general probe or a category selection probe, then the text box should be larger. And if you are interested in a short statement or a short definition, some key words, then it's better to have a smaller text box and reduce the burden for the respondents. And as I said earlier, if you are interested in two different topics or positive and negative aspects of a topic, then it's better to ask two separate probes. Otherwise, there's always the risk that only one aspect is addressed and not both aspects. So the size of the text box and really shows respondents what is expected from them. Then also probe placement is important. Here the recommendation is to place a probe on a separate screen to keep the response process for the open-ended probe distinct from the response process for the closed-ended question. So you first have the question to be tested, and on the next survey page, the probe would be presented. And here, and when you have multiple probes follow on one target question, then there are different ways to present these multiple probes. You can either choose to present them on separate survey pages called paging design. So you have the question to be tested, then on the following page, probe 1, and one page later, probe 2. Or you can present them on one subsequent survey page, and this would be a scrolling design, and the respondent would have to scroll to see the second probe. In the paging design, respondents only see the probes when clicking to the following pages, and in the scrolling design, they need to scroll, and this might increase complexity because more information is presented on one screen, and this might contribute to lower respondent performance. And we compared these two designs in an experiment with regard to data quality of the responses and dropouts. So how many respondents abandoned the survey during these multiple probe pages. And this is work in progress, but our first evidence suggests that multiple open-ended probes should be presented on separate pages. So the paging design, here in this design, we found the lowest rate of non-responses. And yeah, we found that for all other data quality indicators, there were no differences between the two designs or implementation formats, but the paging design produced the lowest rate of non-responses. Although I have to say that non-response was really high. We had about 25% of respondents who did not provide a response to the probes. So yeah. Then another recommendation would be to make the response task as easy as possible for the respondent. So my colleague Dorothy Baer and other colleagues have studied how probing questions should be presented, and they recommend repeating the context of the question along with the probe on one page. So this means stating both the question text of the survey question being tested and also the answer option selected. And this, or they interpreted it like this allows respondents to concentrate fully on the probe content, and they don't have to remember the target question, or they don't need to go back to the previous survey page if they are unsure about the target question, and this might facilitate the response process for them. And for questions with numerical scales, they also recommended to repeat the labels of the endpoints of the scale to avoid confusion. So it's unfortunately on German, but it is said your answer was 3 on a scale from 1 to 7. And then it's important to say, okay, 1 was not at all important and 7 was very important when you ask respondents to explain why they have chosen value 3, for example. What has also been found is that when your study includes identical probes, for instance, several selection probes, category selection probes with the same layout and the same text box size, this may lead to habituation effects among respondents. So respondents may then not read the probe text of the different probes. And it's therefore really important to carefully reflect on the sequence and also the design of the probe. So a solution might be to change the layout or the text box to make sure that respondents don't answer a category selection probe when you ask a general probe or a comprehension probe, for instance. Then another research question we were interested in was what is the maximum number of probes you can ask in a cognitive online pretest? And this was another study with my colleague Timo Lenzner, and we studied whether the number of open-ended probes asked has an effect on the quality of the responses and also on the depth of respondents' answers. And to do this, we varied the number of open-ended probes that respondents received in a web survey. And the total questionnaire consisted of 26 survey questions, and respondents either received 13 probes or 21 probing questions. So really a high number of probing questions. And to compare differences in response quality, we looked at data quality indicators like the amount of probe non-response, the amount of uninterpretable answers, also dropouts, the number of words respondents typed in per probe, response times, the overall survey evaluation, and also how many number of themes respondents mentioned. And the findings showed that asking the greater number of open-ended probes is possible, and it did not undermine the quality of respondents' answers. So we did not find differences with regard to the data quality indicators. Only for For dropouts, here we found differences. So we had a slightly higher break-off rate with more probes than with less probes. But if respondents were willing to answer probes, then we did not find any differences in the quality of the answers they gave. Some limitations of the study, we also used an online access panel. So we had online access panelists who were paid if they complete the survey. And also the respondents were informed that on the start screen that this is a pretest study and that they would help to revise survey questions when answering the open-ended questions. So this might have an effect on their willingness to answer them properly. Other web probing studies without this explicit announcement of a pretesting study work usually well with 6 to 8 probes in a 15-minute survey. So, yeah. As I said, open-ended questions are more prone to non-response, and so are cognitive probes. And in contrast to closed questions, in which non-response is equal to giving no answer for open-ended questions, non-response is possibly not immediately apparent. So respondents can refuse to enter any text, but they can also enter text without any interpretable context, or just some random letter combinations, or meaningless responses, root responses, whatever. So here on the slide, you see different types of non-response. And important is that so what you define as non-response also depends on your research question. So it might be okay if respondents say, I have no idea. This might be a valid answer for your research question, and in another study, this might be categorized as don't know non-response. So as we have this higher non-response rates, how to tackle non-response. So one step is to design the probes in an appropriate way. So see the slides before, make the response process for respondents as easy as possible. Another option is implementing so-called soft checks in online service software. These soft checks gently remind respondents of an answer, and it's the software automatically checks whether the text box is empty or not, and in case respondents did not write anything in the text box, it's shown a message stating, for instance, the question is very important for the course of the questionnaire, and respondents still can decide to skip the question without answering, but then they have to click this box here in yellow and can then decide to leave the option blank, but it's a bit higher burden and also a motivation to answer the probe. Another option is an open source tool called Eval Answer, which has been developed by Lars Kasmirek, Katharina Meitinger, and Dorothee Beer. And the tool automatically detects different types of non-response and makes a conversion attempt, like the soft check. And then if a non-response is detected, they ask another follow-up question, which is tailored. So if, for example, the respondent answer is no idea, this would be detected. And on the next page, there would be another probe or motivation sentence stating, please consider this question again. Your answer is very important for this research project. And according to the authors, the conversion rate is highly efficient. So with 74% of non-respondents providing a response after being followed up with such a motivational statement. And you can find more information on how to use this tool in their paper, and there's also a video demonstration available on YouTube. So and what's also interesting in this context is that this tool works for different languages, English, Spanish, German, and it can also be used for non-response coding after data collection. So if you have your Excel file, then you can also use this tool to flag the non-response responses, and you do not have to code them manually. Then, as I said in the beginning, you can also implement closed instead of open-ended probes. And the use of closed probes allows also quantification of patterns of interpretation and errors. And it has the advantage that it reduces the costs and burden involved in processing and analyzing the data, because in contrast to open-ended probes, closed probes do not need to be manually coded, and they also reduce the burden for respondents and are therefore less prone to non-response. And together with Katharina Meitinger and Dorothee Beer, we conducted a study in which we compared open-ended and closed probes. And we compared the probe types with regard to the substantive content and also non-response. And what we found is that the two probe types are, they do not provide comparable results. So we found differences in the number of themes that were covered by respondents, and also in the patterns of interpretation, and respondents' number of themes they mentioned, or the response option they chose. So our conclusion was that both formats have strengths and weaknesses, and you should carefully select the appropriate approach for your research question. So for us, it seemed that closed probes are useful when you as a researcher have a particular and relatively narrow hypothesis or prediction that you would like to investigate, and you are able to formulate a probe and the response categories to study this specific issue. And when the objective is to, when it's your research question is more general, or when you are interested in the breadth of interpretation of responses, then you implementing an open-ended probe seems more appropriate. So
Cornelia, we're at 11:20, so some people who have 11:30 might start to drop off.
Okay.
Just wanted to give you a heads up.
I will hurry up. So I have just one slide. When to implement web probing. And I just wanted to mention that besides implementing web probing as a pre-testing method, you can also implement it in the main survey, or also for post hoc evaluation. So at the main production stage, web probing might be used to learn about the validity of questions or answer patterns and their prevalence. When you use it as a post hoc evaluation, this might help you to explain anomalies in the data, or if you found in your main study that some questions were problematic in general, then this might be a technique to find the reasons for these problems. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward for your questions, if you have any.
So there are, I believe, 2 in the chat already.
Okay. Maybe I stop sharing my screen.
That's all my fault. So maybe I'll.
That's great.
A lot of questions.
I'll come back to the first one that I kind of parked. You said at one point, reliability and validity, but all the questions that you were framing out seem to me to be reliability questions. Is there any kind of questions or ways that you could do this to assess validity, or is there an argument you would make for why some of the questions you ask do speak to validity?
So if I get you right, of course you must know what you would like to measure with your question. And if we, for example, conduct a pretesting study, we ask for the construct what the researcher or survey questionnaire designer are interested in and what the question is intended to measure. So, and of course, you can also implement other questions to measure constraint validity, for example, in the same survey, and then correlate the responses with these other variables. But mainly you as a researcher have to decide whether the responses fit to the concept behind. So sometimes it might be okay if respondents have a narrow or rather broad understanding of a specific term. So this is really depending on the research question or the focus of the question.
What would you think if I kind of said the following for a probing question? Like, if I'd have asked you this last week, how would you have responded? Does that seem at all to you to be a good way of getting at kind of reliability, in the sense that people are going to give you a consistent answer over time? Or do you really have to dig into the why that you get out of the inquiry to sort of understand whether that's the case?
That's a very good question. So often for questions how reliable the answer is, there's also the technique to ask about how confident respondents are that this is the right response, and this also gives you an idea how reliable the answer is. But honestly, we did not implement it in web probing studies. So this is more a technique used in face-to-face cognitive interviews. So I'm not sure how good it would work. So I would rather go then with a probe like you formulated and see what you're getting out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, related to that, often you really have to check your probes or pretest your probes before you're implementing them in a study, because you don't know how respondents react or whether they understand it. So it's often good to look into the responses after you have invited a small sample, to see whether the probes work or not, and whether you are getting the information you're interested in.
So I'll let someone else take a turn if there's other questions. I won't hog the. Okay. So, sorry.
Well, I was interested in when I was kind of looking through the specifics of how it was designed. I was thinking, I think I could probably do this in Qualtrics, because of course, I have so many, such a long history of material in there. And so switching to another software option, although it's amazing that there's one available, I was a little bit like, oh, I don't know. Do you know if anyone has experimented with being able to use it within some of the common survey?
Do you mean the eval answer tool? Because the probing question can be implemented in every online survey program you like. So we use one, but you can also use other. So this would be a usual online survey program. And this eval answer tool for tackling non-response, I am not sure. I think it's based on JavaScript, so but it's just a guess. I would think it can also be implemented in online software tools that allow that you program your own questions.
Yeah, I would think so too.
Yeah,
something to try.
So you brought up that table where you had kind of the differences in between your, face-to-face probing and then your virtual probing.
Mm-hmm.
And, with 20 people, 15% versus 12% is not a huge difference. But the one where there was the big difference was the understanding of civil disobedience. Do you think that your online people, when they came to a term that they weren't familiar with, just, because they're sitting at their computer anyways, did a quick Google search? Whereas, if you're sitting down to a survey, you might be less inclined to do that.
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons. For one, so in the lab, respondents kind of expect that they have to say reasons why they chose a specific response or not, and they are aware that if they do not know a term, this might come up later. So they often state it spontaneously. And in web probing, when we looked at the responses, we often find perfect definitions of civil disobedience, showing that someone opened Wikipedia and copy and pasted the definition into the open text box. So it's of course, but it's rather easy to identify when respondents did not write their own definition, but came up with a really perfect definition. But of course, it's easier to look it up in a web context. But in my opinion, for respondents who do not want to answer these open-ended questions, they just leave it open. So it's they don't go this extra step to open another tab and Google the term. So they just skip the question and leave it blank. Mm-hmm. But although there are differences in the proportion of respondents who name this problem, for you as a survey developer or question developer, you have to decide how severe this problem is for you. And if there are in 20 interviews, there half of the respondents say they have no clue what this is, or have a rather vague definition in mind, then it's better to include an instruction. And it's the same in web probing. So there might be perfect definitions and a lot of people who skip it. But when there are only a few cases or a small amount of respondents, then you have to say, okay, that's fine. Some people don't know the term. In cognitive interviewing in general, it's not that much about the numbers that have this problem. It's more about how severe this problem would be for your later data.
Sounds like that's kind of the heart of it, is that you really have to be thinking for any given question, and then the survey as a whole, how important or how broad is this? And that slide that you had, the nature of the different kinds of probing questions, I found that incredibly helpful, because it seems like you don't want to waste someone's time with your probes. And so you have to be really careful about probing for what you understand as the vulnerability for any given question.
Yeah. And if you have a specific question, then my recommendation would be to be as specific as you can be, because otherwise, you have to read a lot of responses which do not help you in the end. And,
All right, any last comments or questions? Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Cornelia,